Good morning and welcome to the Leadership in Insurance podcast, or shall I say the Leadership in Product podcast. So today we've got our second panel episode. Been really lucky to be joined by some leaders in insurtech businesses that specialize in product. And in this conversation, we're going to basically be diving into all things product related. So very lucky to have a panel of some of the most prominent leaders in the product space in insurtech to discuss scaling both product and product teams and the lessons that they've learned from these roles. So without further ado, and simply going on the rotation of how I'm looking at it, Monique, it'd be really kind if you could introduce yourself and your role and obviously the business that you work for.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Monique Nelson. I'm currently Vice President of Product at Highwing. A little bit about Highwing. Highwing's a transaction platform for commercial middle market business. I know that's a mouthful, so I'll explain it in just a minute. So it's traditionally large and complex risks have not really been transacted digitally. So they're relying a lot on manual processes. You don't see that kind of straight through processing like you do in small commercial and personal lines. And so we're really solving that, looking to send structured data over the line. We're very early stage going for our Series A. So super exciting times, but you'll see, from when we dive into this, just how I think about product and how that impacts an early stage startup and how, art and science and all of that just kind of come into play here. I have spent more than 10 years in insurtech helping to bring 2 startups to successful acquisition. Really have done it all: product, partnerships, analytics, client success, and sales.
Amazing. Thanks, Monique. And again, just on rotation, Richard, you're next on my screen, so it'd be great if you could introduce yourself.
Sure, of course. Thanks, Alex. So yeah, my name's Richard. I'm the head of product at Zego. So especially looking at the commercial fleet, so what we internally call B2B products. So Zego is an insurtech, so I'm going to put my product hat on like for a minute. It's a tech that happens to do insurance. Mm-hmm. The mission at Zego is really to save customers time and money. I think we do that through being a data and product-driven organization. So it's really looking at diving at the problems that we want to solve for our customers and really keeping that mindset throughout the life cycle of the journey. And that's it. Joined Zego for about a year and still crazy about it.
Amazing. Love that. And Colleen, last but not least, it'd be lovely to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for having me, Alex. It's great to be here and great to be with Monique and Richard. So my name is Colleen Wells. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for a company called Veruna, an insurtech. I'm recently hired with Veruna. I've only been with them 2-ish months. So super new, but really excited to be with them. We are an agency management system, but really special. We're built on Salesforce technology, so it's a little bit magical in terms of what we're able to provide for the agency space, along with carriers, customers, and MGA solution, right? So really thinking about insurtech and what insurtech has tried to solve for in the insurance space for the last 10 plus years. Veruna has the capabilities of doing that with Salesforce in the background, right? So looking at our customers, the trifecta, right? Looking at your customers, your agents, and your carriers, and breaking down those barriers and bringing them together to solve for how to do insurance business better, right? So I'm excited to work with Veruna to bring insurance better to that team. So, and funny, Monique, when you were talking about your background, I was thinking, wow, we've really been on a very similar path. So I've been in the insurance technology for a very long time, done a lot of the similar things: product, strategy, customer success, implementation. So we've been down similar roads. So excited to talk about it here today. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you all for doing those intros. I'm obviously Alex Bond. I'm the founder of FinPro, which is an executive search business in the insurtech space. But obviously, I know next to nothing about product. That's why we've got experts here. So thank you. And I think it's really good that we've got a real sort of spread of kind of what the InsurTech hat looks like, from full stack insurers through to kind of more SaaS propositions, and even within that, utilizing different technologies, building upon like different technologies, and serving different customers. So hopefully we can have a really valuable conversation. So Monique, I wanted to start with you, and you mentioned it in your intro, and I think this is a question that I talk about all the time. This is when I'm trying to fluff my lines to pretend I know about product, which is great product building an art or a science? And I suppose, when should teams listen to their gut versus the data? It seems to be a conversation I have all the time. I just wanted to get your opinion on it.
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I mean, the short answer that I have is it's both. I mean, and it's so dependent on the stage of the company, stage of the product. I'm at the earliest stage company that I've ever been at, and it is so much, really kind of trusting, what you're hearing and how you kind of turn that into product, but you're also testing hypothesis the whole time. So it's really a mix of, while it is intuition based in terms of like which bets to take, you're still testing a hypothesis to see if it sticks, and you're trying to really get to product market fit. Now, when you get to, mid-stage companies, they've got it figured out. Really, they're trying to weigh prioritization. What do we do next? Which direction do we go in? Can we capitalize more and make more revenue? And I think that is driven a lot by data that you start to have that you don't have at early stage. You understand usage, you understand behavior, you understand buying decisions. And so that all influences, how you go to market. And that's really a powerful thing when you get to that stage. And then when you get to big companies, you get to acquisitions, there might be duplicate efforts all over the place. And then you're really starting to look at consolidating. And that, I think, is so much science-based. I mean, you're looking at, again, data, which product is going to get you the furthest, which might have better technology. And, I've seen all of that. And so I think, being able to kind of differentiate between what's intuition and where you need to kind of test those hypotheses is really that kind of art that comes into play.
Mm-hmm. I say, like, loosely, I always think of it as like the art's the imaginative bit that you need to create interesting products, and the science is the sort of proving bit. But then out of the science can come opportunities for more imagination as well. So it's like it's a circle rather than kind of an either or scenario. Just because I think that's a question we ask all the time, I wondered if any of other panelists wanted to chip in on that one, because I think it's so core in where product sits. I can see Richard's been smiling throughout, so clearly I was going to throw it to Richard and go, what do you think, art versus science in the product space?
No, I think definitely Monique got it right. If you'd overlap, science and arts, product management, I'd say, would pretty much sit right in the middle where both worlds live together. Maybe to add on that, I'd say, when you come into like defining what could be like a great product team, I think it's really the teams that manage to really harness the pros and cons of each approach and knows really how to dance really between these two worlds. And because, like, exactly as Monique said, like, based on like so many variables, like the stage of a company definitely is one. Then you'd have to be more artistic, and then eventually become more scientist. I think it's that dance really that defines, like, great product teams know exactly when to switch their mindset to one more than another to really, I think, put the focus where it needs to be, like whether vision or execution. Like sometimes one is more important than the other, and it's like that back and forth between both. But yeah, spot on, Monique, for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Colleen, I saw you nodding in agreement. I'm assuming you feel so. I was going to ask you slightly variation of that question, because you've worked for very large insurtechs and now you're working for a much more startup business. Has that, and I know it's a bit unfair because you've only been with the business sort of, as you say, sort of 2.5 months, but do you think, is it more in the imagination stage now, and previously it was more in the sort of data and science stage at bigger companies? Is that a fair reflection on how you've seen it, or is that oversimplifying it?
I think it's a little bit oversimplifying it, because I still think even at an early startup, there's the capabilities of using some data, even if it's not the data that you can measure yourself. You can still compare yourself against in the space, right? But I think I'll say something that I think we didn't talk about, which I think is super critical, and I think we all forget, and I think it's the one place that we fail, right? Technology is meant, like, we're here to do something for customers, right? We're here to serve customers, right? And so the best products, right, are a combination of great user experience and improving a solution for our customers. So operational efficiencies, simplifying processes. And so the key for me for successful product development is really truly understanding your customers. So listening to what their needs are, asking them what they want, not only asking them like, are they gonna like this, but are they gonna actually use it once you've developed it, right? And so having those concepts as a guiding star for your product development. And I think that's where a lot of companies fail, because they forget about those things. They turn inwardly when they're thinking about product development and product management. And that's where they don't get things right. So we listen to ourselves and the gut that you're talking about instead of asking the users, and we get it wrong. And I've seen that happen at small insurtechs and large companies that I've worked for, and that's where that's one of the reasons actually I came to Veruna, because one of the reasons that really drew me here is not only the possibilities of thinking about what we can do to like change the space, but how they listen to their customers, how they're thinking differently about improving the experience and being able to change really what the customers need and want. And that's really what makes a solution so powerful and successful.
That's so interesting, particularly in the insurtech space. I think there's been, particularly the earlier stages, and I think it's less so now, and obviously the funding environment has changed slightly as well, and that's kind of changed the dynamic of things. But I always think about, there was a really early stage company, I won't name them because it's very unfair, but they sort of basically came out with an insurance product that when they went, oh, it's 70% cheaper than anything, and it was absolutely fundamentally undeniably true, but the price point wasn't enough that anyone cared. So everyone went, so what? It was so, and all this time and effort had gone in, and they looked exactly as you said, inwardly, and they went, we can save 70%. Why wouldn't anyone want to save 70%? Because it wasn't important enough. It wasn't a big enough number. Nobody cared. Like we were happy with the unit price, so it didn't really make any difference. So, and they weren't doing anything else outside of that. So I think that's really interesting. Colleen, staying with you actually, I wanted to talk to you about your specifically role. So you were brought in as Chief Strategy Officer, but sitting within the product vertical. And I wanted to kind of understand how you kind of strike this balance between strategy and product, and where the two overlap and where those two elements cross over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I think there's a huge overlap. There's a big overlap. But I think there's a tangible distinction too, right? So when you're thinking about strategy, right? So it's a thinking, right? It's a thinking process. It's like, what are we going to do in 1 to 2 years? What are we going to do in 3 to 5 years? Where do we make those investments in the 5+ years? And how do we organize that, and how do we think about that and make the right investments from a strategic perspective so that we're successful as an organization, so that we have wins as a startup company, so that we're doing the right things, the right go-to-market. We're thinking about who are our customers, who are our right customers, and how can we see that success in the near term and in the long term. So I think about that from a strategy. That's what strategy is. And then product is, how do I get my product team to execute on all of those things, right? To then start thinking about, we have these great ideas on what we want to do in the 1, 3, 5 year stage, and how do we take that vision and execute on that vision, and bring that into the product. And so I still see there's a big overlap between that strategic thinking and that product development. And it's a huge team effort in terms of working together and bringing those together. But I do think, you and I have talked about this before, the execution and the strategy, I think they're different. If you have a strategy team and then you have a product team, and they're one person or one team, right? product development, product execution is always going to be first, and strategy is always going to be pushed into the back, right? Especially in a startup, right? Because you're trying to be scrappy, and you're trying to get things done, and you got to get things out, and you're kind of taking, like, you got to go with what you have, right? And so you kind of forget about it, and it's hard when you're executing to also be thinking about, oh, what are we gonna do in 5 years, right? You're like, you can't think about that. You're like, what am I gonna do tomorrow, right? You know what I mean? So sometimes in the beginning, it's nice to have the capability and the money, right, to have those, to have those as separate roles. So, Veruna, it's great that we have that separately, but we do work as very much as a cohesive team in terms of talking about what we want to do, how we want to execute it, and how we're going to deliver it to the space. And it really does, our strategy really does lead into our product development efforts every day. We have meetings every day. We talk about it every day. So there's a huge overlap.
Sure. I suppose it echoes on what you were saying as well about the customer. Really what we're talking about is, what does the customer want now or need now? What do they need in a year? What are they going to want in 5 years' time, potentially, that they don't even know about? And that being that bellwether in the strategy team, and being able to feed that build back into product. So we can't afford the time to do it now, but we need to start thinking about these things in the future. Because we were having I had a really interesting conversation on the 11FS podcast about, we're building a working environment for the people that are working today. But we keep talking about this next generation of people that are coming. They're going to want different things. They're going to have different values, but we're not building the jobs for those people yet. And we need to start building the jobs and the working environments where, we've all allowed back into office now, and loads of people have just like bundled back into office because they'll go, oh, I miss everybody. But people who are joining that make friends online, that don't see people face to face, because that's just not the generation they're built up in. It even applies to jobs. So I think about it even from my perspective, is like, if a job is a product, and it is in my world, how are we building jobs for people in the future? Richard, I wanted to come to you. You've been a product leader outside of the insurance industry up until this role, isn't it? Is that correct to say? Or no, there was a Zurich in the background?
So I've actually started a very small car insurance in Spain. Basically, when I relocated to Barcelona about roughly 2 years ago, I wanted to give the InsurTech a stab and see, what this is all about, coming from an angle of how do we leverage data through telematics. So, basically trying to solve, why do young drivers have to pay more than, older drivers, and why someone who drives really well have to pay more than someone who drives like Lewis Hamilton on the roads. And then decided to stay actually within the InsurTech. I was like, oh, this is actually quite interesting. So I'm going to give it some more years.
Great. Well, Lewis Hamilton would be all right. It's if you drive like Max Verstappen, I think it's usually a problem. The thing I wanted to ask you specifically was that, coming into the insurance space, what's the sort of biggest single product challenge that you've faced to date, and how have you overcome it within the context of insurance? I suppose that in my head I'm thinking, is it regulated markets, or is it something broader than that, or more specific than that?
So that's a very, very good question, and I think there are so many answers to that. Because to be honest, when I first joined the InsurTech world, I was like, wow, my first impression was that this is going to move slowly. There isn't actually that much things to solve, and 2 years forward, I'm still here, and I'm barely scratching really the surface of that whole ecosystem. I think if I'd have to look at the one thing is how do we leverage data to really offer the best products of tomorrow from the insurance point of view with these changing worlds. I took an example earlier of the young drivers, and I truly believe that this can be exported to many, many, many more use cases, but it's in the insurance, you really want to choose the right customers. It's always that sweet spot between the high growth, where you turn I want to grow, but you don't want to kill your loss ratios, and you really want to be sure that you have the right growth. So it's moving that dial up and down. And I think the the biggest challenge, and I'm still working through that, is really how do we leverage any type of data around us to really come up with the best solutions to the problems. Like a young driver tomorrow gets the driving license, he's 18, 20 years old, drives perfectly well, doesn't have an accident the whole year, and still sees his premium going up 20% at the end of the life cycle. Completely unfair. Why? I think the honest answer up until today is because, well, the industry basically have done that for a century, and it's just like people are almost get used to that, and you often hear premium goes up. Okay, fair enough. Like you see, actually, really people even accepting the unfairness here, and I think that is to me still up until today the biggest challenge of all is do that education piece with the wide market and try and bring all these data points that you can find offering the best solutions to all these problems and lowering of premiums. How do we help customers, lower their accidents, bring them in the whole journey of when you have an accident on the road, what's your claim experience? So many problems, but if there is one to choose, definitely how do we leverage data at any given point to build the best products.
Interesting. I wanted to follow up with that as well, because something that is I've been lucky enough to interview a couple of your colleagues previously, and one of the things that stuck with me is that you're very strong on we're a tech business that happens to operate in the insurance space, and I was wondering how much that impacts the way that you think about product.
Well, I think, I'm lucky enough, like in Zego, we've got, I think, the A team really when it comes to product management. Is we've got people very, very much like me coming from a wide variety of backgrounds, from InsurTech, but also really FinTech, media, any type of tech industry around. I think the crux of it all always comes back to putting the customer first. Like when, as you said, Colleen, is like it's so easy to get lost in the weeds of trying to come up with an insurance product, trying to look 5 years ahead. This is what we want to do to make money. Blah, blah. I think, when you get the best product team around coming from different backgrounds, it kind of gives you the ability to have diverse perspective to the problem. And as you said, Colleen, to come back to just let's hold on for a second. What are we trying to solve here today? Like, what's the problem at the core of everything? And I think I would really put down really to that is that ability to always come back at any given time to the customer you're trying to solve. I mean, I think it's not that the insurance hasn't done that in the past, but it's just and London is such an amazing place for that. Being able to bring so many talents from all around, say like, this is the problem, how do we solve it? And like really come back to it instead of coming from an angle of the insurance, thinking about loss ratios, etc. Is like, what are we trying to solve?
Yeah, that's really interesting. No, thank you for that. Monique, coming back to you, I feel like I'm hitting you with all the big questions. I suddenly realized that not that they haven't been big questions previously, but I've got questions like, how do you define great product management? You got art versus science, and now you've got
all the hard hitters.
Just define product management for us in 2 minutes? No, exactly. And I suppose going on from that as well, just to extrapolate before, is that why do people get it wrong? Why does it go wrong as much as anything as well? So sort of two parts is defining what really good looks like within it, but also why do people get it wrong?
And it's such a good question. And I think, kind of coming full circle back to what has already been said by both Colleen and Richard is that you really have to think through it from the lens of your customer. And you also have to think through it when it comes to business outcomes. So tying it back to your outcomes and what you're trying to solve, I think is so important. I think a lot of times you get caught up in features and benefits, which is great. You have to have features. You're building features constantly, but it's not tied back to an outcome on the business side. Then you're going to start to get it wrong. One thing that stuck with me recently is, we hear oftentimes that the technology is so great, but maybe you're not top in the industry. And so maybe oftentimes you see, am I being Betamax? I don't know if you guys have seen that Disney movie. You don't want to be Betamax. You want to have a balance of solving client problems and great technology. And I think that especially in the insurance space, there's just this technology overload. I mean, InsurTech has become a buzzword in the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, when I started in the industry, there was no InsurTech. And so I was with a company that was InsurTech before InsurTech was a thing. And there is just so much technology out there now that they're overwhelmed and inundated with change management. So if you're not building product with the customer in mind and the customer that will actually use it, not just who's buying it, but who's going to use it, then you're going to fail, and you're going to fail at change management. So when I posted a poll last week around how do you measure success in product? Is it revenue? Is it usage? Is it something else? And I had some really great product leaders all over the map on that question, because it's really difficult to line it to one thing. And the truth is, it's the sum of many parts when it comes to building product. It's usage, it's adoption, it's revenue. Of course, if you don't have revenue coming in, you're Betamax. And that's not where you want to be.
That's such an interesting point about how do you define success, and then tying it to the commercials, because I think particularly in the InsurTech space and the earlier stage of it, going back to my previous point, I know a brilliant bunch of guys, and they are guys. I'm really guilty of saying the term guys when I just mean people, but
I am too.
which I'm trying to be better at, actually, because I got told off rightly so. But there's a bunch of guys that they had a great InsurTech, and it was a very specific analytics product, and essentially they demoed it to everyone, and everyone said, this is brilliant, the technology is amazing, and you're right. But it just wasn't a priority. So it was the Betamax theory. I think Betamax was meant to be better quality, wasn't it? It was meant to be a better quality product. And it just didn't fly because they sort of stepped away from the commercials. Now, I don't think it was necessarily that in this space. It's just like bad luck and not a priority enough, and having enough runway to kind of stick it out. But you can be right and you can be early, you can be right and have a great product and nobody sees it. This is why, it's funny in my space, because sales and business development is still this kind of demonized thing within tech businesses. I work with businesses that have the salespeople in a totally different building, which is insane and a bad idea. But there's sort of demonization of that, and you're like, if they don't sell it, you can't keep iterating. And there's always that kind of the best sales teams have a great relationship with product, because they're such a good instantaneous feedback loop to you. So yeah, I find that stuff fascinating. What came top on your poll in terms of what was the kind of overarching
so
thing?
Revenue actually did. And so I had a second part of that, is if there should be sales training for product, because I have a sales background. I started out in sales, and it's interesting, right? I see your face, Richard, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit. Is there an element of sales to product? And I think that to some extent there is. I mean, you have to have bonding with clients. You have to have an understanding of their pain and what's causing that and what the biggest pain is. And you also have to be able to communicate that and articulate it. And I think that, there is kind of some element of sales within product, especially now. I mean, the sales cycle is changing, product is changing, product-led growth is a big deal. And so you're starting to see kind of product kind of leading the charge here when it comes to, business outcomes. And I think that it's important to constantly start to think and think through that. Is, would that benefit the product team, or is it a distraction? I don't know.
I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, actually, Colleen, about sales and product. And
100%, they're a partner in crime, without a doubt. I mean, so not working at some of the larger corporations, InsurTechs, we always got feedback from sales in terms of into our roadmap. They're the first the first line from a customer perspective. So when, from prospect perspective. And so they're answering RFPs, they're talking directly to, to those first handout for customers of like what they're looking for. And they're really understanding some of what Monique said about those pain points, right? And so they are getting some things that the product team isn't getting up front. And they're getting later, right? So they're getting it first, the sales guys. And so they're critical, I think, to be part of that conversation and that product discussion. And you have to reach out to them and ask them those questions. What do you need? What are you hearing? What do you need in the product? What are your customers saying? What are your prospects saying? What are you seeing on the RFPs for certain? The other thing that struck me when Richard and Monique were saying from the insurance industry perspective is, I think too, where we get it wrong is we get lost, right? Like we forget the customer. That's the obvious point, but we go back to our old ways, and we know about InsurTech, and it's this big buzzword, and we're like, yes, we know, we love it. We see it as this partner in the ability to help us solve, but we don't know how. We almost don't know how. As in, like, forget about hold the customer to the aside for a second, but agents, carriers, it's like you can't break those silos, and it becomes a barrier to success, like the confusion of what's going on in the space. And so that, the problem in terms of that not being able to come together as an industry, I feel like also has been one of the challenges for InsurTech to be able to be successful. I see that changing. I have seen that significantly change, particularly, I hate to say this, particularly since COVID, I hate to say that, but I mean, it has, because it's changed. Alex, you mentioned it's changed how we work, it's changed how we think, but it's still a barrier for us in terms of being able to take advantage of some of the technologies, even some of the processes of how we work together. And hopefully that will, hopefully we'll start to think differently as an industry. And take some cues from some of the other industries that are out there, fintech, and that have been more successful than insurance has been. I see Richard laughing, but it's so true.
No, yeah, it's completely true. It's completely true. I've had like a time in fintech, and it's true that the entire ecosystem is completely different. Like all the actors like actually play together. So the addition of all the parts makes a greater result. And sometimes it feels like InsurTech is still lagging behind on that aspect. It's true.
We'll get there though. We'll get there.
I think everyone likes to play the blame game. I mean, I've been in this industry a long time, and I worked for a big carrier, and when things went wrong at the carrier, it's because the broker messed it up. And when the brokers, they always blame on the carriers, and then if it's not them, it's like the third party providers, and you go, it's probably equal share, at some point along the way. And actually, if we kind of committed to just saying, let's communicate with each other, but that is it's a cultural shift. And I think you're right, Colleen. I think it's, if you think about just taking Lloyd's as a perfect example, the electronic submission just wasn't taking off, like it wasn't happening. Then it had to happen. Funnily enough, it's happening now, because it's like, oh, we've made this work. So, it's no surprise to me that that's happening. Talk about successes and failures. Colleen, I wanted to ask you, how do you keep a product team upbeat when products fail? And then also kind of, I suppose I'm really sort of getting into the weeds of like how this works, and then also not letting them lose focus if something's wildly successful, because I'd imagine both of those are equally, the wheels fall off either end of that.
Yeah, I mean, so I think at a startup, even if it's, even if you're, mid startup-ish, more into it, right? I think there's an expectation that things are going to fail, and it's okay, right? So it's, it's okay to fail, as long as with failure you learn, and you take responsibility, right? And then you learn for the next time, right? And I think those things are okay. And people who are in the startup world, know that's going to happen, right? Even if they're not up in the startup world and you're working agile and you've been in you've been in insurance and you've been in technology space for a while, believe me, you've failed this game one time or another. So you're used to it. So I think those things happen and people are just used to it, and you pick yourself up, you've learned something for next time and you apply it, right? And as long as you're doing those things, it's okay. I also think it's okay to be successful, be wildly successful, and cheer for that, right? Like, I encourage that. Like, that's one of the things about building great product teams is to understand what you did wrong and apply it to the next time, apply that failure to the next time, and then to promote those successes, right? So like, I think about it as like a football team, right? So as long as you have, like, the Super Bowl. So, everybody's going to win the Super Bowl. No one wants to lose. You don't get into this game because you want to have a failed product. You want to have something super successful. You want to have something that achieves something super special and magical, empowers the industry for your customers, your agents, the carriers, that does something for the industry, right? You don't get in this game for anything other than that. That's the Super Bowl, right? So you're here to deliver and play like a team and win like run, right? And so that's what you got to promote. And so and that's how you have a great product team, right? You have to dream big, win big. Sometimes you fail, right? That's what it's all about. That's the game. That's a successful product team.
I love that. And I suppose it was funny because we were defining what success looked like. And as you were speaking, I was like, defining what failure looks like in the product space as well, because as long as you're learning, and I presume failing quickly is always the famous thing, isn't it? And then moving on, then you're in a good space. I'm intrigued about successes though, because I think this is something I am very guilty of, and working through therapy on, is that everything that goes right is sort of luck. Everything that goes bad is fundamentally my fault.
I know.
And that's why I think about success being quite difficult to sometimes manage. You can get clouded by, we've sold this product brilliantly and it's done really well financially, and then you don't question whether it's right or not, or perfect or better. And it could be that you're just better than everything else, and everything else is terrible as well. So I was interested about kind of like, how do you maintain the sort of thirst and desire for greatness in a product that's doing very, very well? Monique, did you have any thoughts on that? I'm intrigued to see what you think about that.
Yeah. I mean, such a great question. I was listening to someone. We had our company offsite a month or so ago. We had a speaker come and join, and they've seen tons of success early on. And he said something that really struck a chord with me. And it was, early on, it was so easy to build product because we just did it. But then as time goes on, things slow down. You got tech debt. Did you maybe, not take a great look at the architecture side of things, and you need to go back and kind of shore things up? And I think that that's such a great thing to be aware of when you're building product, is that your architecture and what you're building it on, that foundation, is really important. And if you don't spend enough time with the foundation, you're on a hamster wheel at some point, and you're just trying to keep up. And if you are successful and you're on a hamster wheel, then it's just a matter of time before you start to kind of lose that. And so I think it's important to be kind of critical of that foundation, and make sure that foundation is strong and solid and able to scale. And it's something that when you're in a startup, you're just constantly trying to get new things out the door. But if you're not conscious of the foundation that it's built on, then you won't be successful. And so success isn't just about revenue. It's about, do we have a lot of tech debt? Is this going to fall down? Do we have tons of support tickets? And I think that, there's a lot that kind of goes into this, but I think being able to say and confidently that your product is able to withstand lots of people, lots of traffic coming in and out, I think is so important. And that's something I think that's often overlooked when you think about product. It's, we've got revenue, we're selling it, but is it able to withstand the test? I don't know. I think that's something to really be aware of. And it's such a fine balance.
Richard, I wanted to bring you in on this because I was going to ask you a sort of related question, really, and it was really about kind of maintaining momentum because Zego is a very very fast growing, subsequently very large business, and how do you keep that momentum going in a business that's scaling at that speed? I kind of get it in smaller businesses. It's kind of mainly because I have worked for very, very, very large businesses, but they've always been very established. I worked for a big carrier, which moved at glacial speed. You're working at this sort of hypergrowth business. How do you keep momentum inside your team? How do you, and it's kind of very closely related to that. It's like, how do you kind of keep that sort of inquisitive kind of drive going in that environment, in that context?
Yeah. But I think like the funny thing that you're mentioning here is that we've actually set up part of our organization, and the one that I'm looking after, as a Series A. So we keep saying that to people internally. It really is the mentality we're going after, is that within Zego, like our group is very much like a self-contained Series A startup within a scale-up company. And that comes with the, I think, notion that and concept that is more and more, I keep hearing more and more in the insurtech industry, is the concept of MVP product. I think when you look at what really motivates product people is like that learning phase that you were saying, Colleen. It's all about really taking the experience and the learning out of everything, whether it's a failure or success. What's so important actually is what you learn from it. And the best way to do that is to start small. You say, look, we don't need to wait a whole year to have this like entire new product, flashy, that is mega scalable. I think let's think about scalability, as Monique said, step 2. First, like we have to learn first whether this is going to stick around. And that's the whole concept of MVP. And when you strip down into translating that to your product team, is like it's a constant innovation. It's like, and that's what keeps them up at night. Is like that's what MVP am I going to do next week? What is the MVP I'm going to do the next month? What I'm going to learn? I think it's the best way to keep your product team motivated, is really like infuse that MVP mindset in everything that we do, whether it's an internal, external launch. It's like everything can be MVP'd. And so I'm a big fan of like that concept from Japanese philosophy, Kaizen. I think that I get that from like my 10 years experience in the tech industry. Is like, today has to be better than yesterday, and tomorrow has to be better than today. That's it. You don't need to look at after that. Like, let's look at what you're going to do tomorrow, and then iterate on it, learn from it, and then think about scalability. And then maybe I'm going to wrap this up into, you have to make sure that you bake that into your into the values. When you start recruiting product teams, you have to make sure that you recruit the people who really believe and buy into the approach. Otherwise, it's basically not going to work. Long story short.
Yeah. I was, obviously recruitment's my stock and trade. That's what I do for a living. But I thought we've got to lead to that at some point. Surely we're going to get to, we got to hire the right people for the right teams. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, and hiring of values, I know, is important to the Zego business, and it's no surprise that it continues in the product team. Wanted to talk about hiring actually, and I wanted to come to you on this, Colleen. I don't like the way I put this question, because I was going to say, what are the biggest mistakes founders make when hiring their first product leader? I just feel like it's a negative way of looking at it. But what should a founder look for? So like a non-product founder, SaaS-driven business, what should they look for in their first product hire? Let's assuming they've got some money to actually hire whatever they want within that kind of range of people we could. But what should they be looking for? What do you think is important?
Yeah, good question. So I think that founders need to look for someone that, especially on the product side, right, where that can execute on the vision, right? I talked about this earlier, right? So the product role is really taking that part of the strategy and then delivering that to the customer, delivering that technology solution to the customer. And so it does go a little bit back to what you were talking about in terms of where do they make the mistake, right? But when you're looking for a product, you know, a product leader, I think where we fall down a little bit is a lot of product leaders have done a lot of things in their past. Like look at Monique and I, right? We have tons of experience all over the space and we've done all sorts of things, right? So, you know, customer success, implementation, you know, technology, maybe you at some point in time, you were a developer, right? You don't want that person to do, maybe at some point during, especially in a startup, right? Again, everybody's scrappy and we may do some of those things over the course of our life as a product leader, but that's not what you hired that person to do. And so when you're looking for that person, you really need someone who understands product, who understands how to deliver, who understands how to model roadmaps, who understands and knows passion for customer and technology. And you got to remember that, because if not, you'll fall into the old trap of this person's a project manager. This person doesn't know how to get teams excited and passionate about delivering something to the industry and really empowering the space. And again, I go back to what I said before, you know, that's really what it's all about, really getting your customers a solution and getting them excited about something that you're delivering. And if you don't have that right person in that seat, you're going to fail.
I love that sort of like that there's so much about energy and I always think of good leaders, particularly in startup businesses, is they're cheerleaders. Like the best people, like they just have energy. Like they have to have energy. Now they can display it in different ways. Obviously, they have to have mastery of the area. But we've all worked with people that have mastery that you wouldn't want to leave it to them to motivate. You know, so I think we specifically specialize in earlier stage businesses, seed and Series A, and 9 times out of 10. You know, I might find a more qualified person, but I'm thinking it's not the person I want to, you know, run a marathon with, because like this person I think can run a marathon. I think they've got the energy. The other person, you know, not so much. So there's so much in that. It's a bit intangible. And I wanted to bring you all on this question, but I'm definitely going to start with Monique in this, because I'm conscious of time, and I really wanted to get your sort of views on this. Monique, what are for you? And this is a really tough question. I've done it to you again. It's like I feel like I've started with all the really like I'm not saying they haven't been for tough questions outside of that, but I think, you know, what are your like must-ask questions when you're hiring someone in your team, product manager for your team? What are your like must-ask questions in a product interview?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, to be honest, I think the right questions are important, but I find myself leaning more into what they're asking. If you're curious about the product, you're curious about the industry, you're curious about how to, you know, take something to market, that to me is so important. So while I think it's great to be able to ask the right questions, I always find myself really kind of leaning into the questions that they're asking. So I think you can tell a lot about a person, about just their curiosity level and whether they'll be successful. I think oftentimes we lean into someone having to have industry experience, someone having to have, you know, years and years of experience. When really, I mean, something that I often ask for is, what are you optimizing for? And it's something that it takes a little bit of thought. You're not going to be able to necessarily answer this like right off the bat. I've had people say, hey, I love that question. I'm going to think about it and I'll answer it at the end. And I like that, because what that does is it allows someone to really think through how they would answer it. Are they optimizing for scale? Are they optimizing for the team and team camaraderie? And I think you learn a lot from someone with that question. And it also kind of throws people off a little bit. So it allows you to see how someone can think on their feet, or if they take the time to be thoughtful, which I think are all really great skills when it comes to product management.
Amazing. And I wanted to get all your thoughts on this, because I thought this was a sort of interesting thing for particularly non-product led founders on this. So Richard, coming to you, do you have any like must-have questions that you put into your tricky product interviews?
I definitely agree with Monique, actually. Maybe to add, I'd say I tend to go with like open-ended questions. I think if you frame it too much, it's almost too easy for them. I want to see if someone is organized, if they actually try and answer within a reasonable time frame, etc., etc. And I think you can tell a lot about, how long do they take to answer a very simple answer, or like, do they take the time to think about it, as Monique said? So yeah, I say general, try and keep them open-ended, more than guided. And then so many of them, it really depends on the person in front of you, really.
Yeah, no, totally. And Colleen, I know you're, very much someone, I would say you're like really personality driven in terms of kind of like how you build bonds with people, and you and I have got to know each other over a period of time, and yeah, I always love your energy. Does that impact your interviewing style, or how do you structure your interviews when you're looking for good product people?
I think I'm a little opposite. I mean, I love people. I always want people to come prepared with questions. I mean, I think you have to come to an interview and ask a lot of questions, but I actually tend to ask a lot of questions too, because I think it's my one opportunity to really get to know a person. And so I grill. Sorry, I'm hard. I mean, but in a nice way, right? But I think the two questions that I ask, they're a little bit tricky. And I always ask them on purpose, and I wrote them down to share with you guys. So the first thing I ask is, what's your biggest failure as a product manager, and why did it happen? And this really helps me understand them a little bit, in terms of, it helps them think critically about like a role as a product manager, talk about a little bit about their sense of ownership. What do they do? How do they make it better? And how do they handle it, right? And it goes back to what we talked about before, is how are they going to handle in a team environment? How do they handle the agile environment? And how are they as a person? So that's the first one. And the second one, that is my all-time favorite, is what was one of your favorite products? And what's something you would have changed about it? And this is a little bit of a tricky question, and because this tells me a little bit again about them. What do they value as a product manager? What do they think about in terms of product in general? So how do they, when they think about priorities, what is it that they're loving about it? How would they have improved something from a process perspective? So it's very product manager driven in terms of the question itself. But the tricky part is, again, I go back to, why did I come to Veruna? It's always about your customer. And so if they don't tell me that they found out something, or they heard something, or something triggered something about, they did something in the product that their customer felt wasn't what they wanted, they failed the answer. Because that's what, if something is wrong in your product, it's because you didn't deliver something that your customer wanted, right? 100% of the time. And so I'm always looking for that as an answer. And I'm looking for people who understand that, because they're going to be customer obsessed. And that's the type of person that I want to hire on my product team.
Those are good. I'm going to take
those.
Like
a tough interview.
Yeah, I was thinking that. I think what's
those 8 people, Richard.
I think what's interesting about that is that as soon as you were saying that, I was thinking it's the reverse of, I used to do some training for interviews for, we had this program in the UK, which was sponsored by the government, which is about taking people from industry and making them teachers, but then pushing them to senior leadership roles within schools really quickly. It was called the Future Leaders Program. And what you found when you interviewed people is they framed everything as we, because they were teachers, so they wanted to be in teams and environments, and that's their nature. They were very giving, and big coaching we had to take about them was they had to say I, like, and what their role was, because they would give away their ownership of something they'd solved to the team. Whereas when you were saying that, I was thinking it'd be so interesting to see how many times when people say, "What's your biggest failure?" I reckon so many people went, "Well, we did this," and then when you say, "What's your biggest success?" "Well, I did this," and I would look for that instantly. But that's a helpful piece of advice. I wanted to finish us on this, and there's just a bit of fun. There's nothing that serious, and I haven't prepped you for it, so forgive me. I want to just go around the three of you, and I'll start with you, Richard. I'll be mean to you. What's the single biggest piece of advice that someone's given you, maybe a former boss or something within the product space, that like always resonates with you? I'll kick off. In the recruitment space, my first ever boss he just always said to me, "Alex, we're not saving lives here." So whenever I got too stressed, he was like, we get people with good jobs, better jobs. Like, and it's always resonated with me. And anytime I get too stressed, I'm like, we're not saving lives here. So that's my bit. But Richard, can you think of anything, one piece of advice you've been given that resonates with you?
Yeah, I'd say this actually goes along these lines. It's don't take it personally. Like, never take anything personally. I think always sticks with me, and keep saying, you're gonna fail. It's it's a sure bet. It's the only thing I'm sure you're gonna fail at some point. Just don't take it personally. That's it.
Perfect. I forgot how much product is about failure and iteration and taking feedback. So if you take it personally, like, I'd be so thin-skinned in product, I'm not built for it at all. Monique, over to you.
Yeah, I would say when I was just starting out in product, and someone told me that you have to act like a mini CEO, and that has really stuck with me. And I think it's how I lead my teams. It's how I kind of show up every day. It's that ownership piece, and I think it's so critical to product, is to really have that pride, and have that, this is something that I'm building, and I'm kind of showing up every day with that cheerleader hat on to get the vision out there. And it's how I kind of show up, is to really have that ownership.
Awesome. And Colleen, lastly, with yourself, is there any piece of advice that sticks with you?
Yeah, I'll go back to tried and true, right? So it's be customer obsessed, right? It's always put the customer first and think about it from their shoes, from a product delivery perspective. But I'll go back to something that Richard said that that has kind of stuck with me also. It's there's always tomorrow.
Yeah.
Don't worry, you'll get it better tomorrow.
Yeah, I love that. So don't take it personally. You're definitely going to fail. Act like a mini CEO, and there's always tomorrow. What great advice. I can't thank you enough for being guests on the podcast. I really appreciate you there. So we're always trying to kind of make things different on the Leadership in Insurance podcast. So it was a real privilege to have all three of you here. And thank you so much for giving up an hour of your time. I genuinely appreciate it a great deal. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Alex.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.